I know that the purpose of writing your books was to try and bring a way of helping parents, but they do need to understand how to look out for the physiological signs of having done enough.
Welcome, Gaynor, for joining me here today. I really appreciate that you're here. I've been here inside our group and our Facebook group, and you've been participating and supporting a lot of family and interaction, and I really appreciate it. So I just wanted to invite you here and talk about your experience, introduce yourself to the audience and how you got into reflex integration work or parent support. So yeah, welcome. So please introduce
Right. I'm Gaynor. I live in the UK. I've been working with reflex integration work for 12 years now. I have a teaching background, so I taught for 20 years, primary school level age, and I got into this as a parent because my eldest son had difficulties here, and it was apparent really from in utero. When he didn't move particularly much in utero, was very quiet, very still baby. I then had to have him by C-section due to complications of my previous pregnancy. And then I noticed that developmentally, he wasn't following along similar lines to all of my peer group, my antenatal group. So he didn't crawl properly as a baby. He dragged one leg out to one side when he did crawl, and he didn't walk until he was 18 months old. So already the alarm bells were going off in my head, but I
yourself.
didn't know why. I didn't know what it meant because, of course, no one teaches you how to be a parent. No one teaches you about your child's development and what you should be looking out for and what you should do to encourage the developmental milestones to happen naturally. But by the time he hit junior school, I knew for sure something was off because he'd struggled all the way through infant school. He was doing strange things in his schoolwork, like drawing a map, Treasure Island map, which teachers love to give to kids to do as an introduction to map skills. And from the middle of the page to the right-hand side, everything was perfectly orientated. All of his words, everything was perfect. But from the middle of the page to the left-hand side, everything was mirror written.
Huh.
Now, I taught for 20 years. I've never seen it again. But there it was in my son's schoolwork. And his teachers hadn't picked it up because they hadn't marked his work. So it was really from that moment on, I started to push what was going on inside my son's brain. Why was he struggling? He particularly found learning to write very difficult, learning to coordinate using a knife and fork, and he had sensory processing difficulties with food textures, although I didn't understand it as sensory processing difficulties at the time. He had hypersensitive sense of smell, all sorts of things that were going on in his system. But it took me 7 years of looking for answers. He had OT, where he was taken out of school, where he would do all these extra sessions to try to help him with his handwriting, didn't really make any difference. He was assessed by a local pediatrician who would only go as far as to say he didn't have ADHD, which I knew. To this day, we've never had a formal diagnosis, but I would say from what I know now, if he was to get a diagnosis, it would be dyspraxia and dyslexia. So he still has language processing challenges. But he was about 13 when I found out about primitive reflexes. And when I got my report from the OT who did it for me, it was just like all these light bulbs just went off in my head. And I thought, well, this just makes complete sense. And so he only did reflex integration for about 6 months before his caseload was disbanded because the OT who took over his caseload didn't really know what he was doing as far as reflex integration was concerned, and he didn't really know how to channel him next. So he was discharged, and I knew in my mummy gut he wasn't done. So I retrained. I found out where I could train. And at that point in time, rhythmic movement training, which is the modality I mainly work in, was only available for 2 instructors in the United Kingdom. And one of them lived about an hour's drive from me. So I contacted her and said, is this something I could train in? I don't have a medical background. I'm only a teacher and a parent. And she said, yes. So my journey began. And honestly, it was just such an answer to everything. All the kids I had tried to help in school. And I had, tried to reinvent the wheel for them
Yeah.
in order to make it accessible for them. But when the brain can't do it, there's a reason the brain can't do it. And this was what I learned from doing this work, is that you have to go for the root cause if you
Mhm.
want to resolve something. So with retraining, I eventually walked away from classroom teaching in 2015 and just went into this full time because I have seen more meaningful results by adding reflex integration and understanding of the brain and the sensory systems into a child's intervention program than in 20 years of teaching. So
Amazing.
that's where I am. I'm now a registered consultant with Rhythmic Movement Training International. I'm a registered instructor for Rhythmic Movement Training International, and I've also got observer faculty, which means I can approve people to teach certain courses within the RMTI package. But I haven't stopped with RMTI. I've got MNRI I'm training in. I've done brain gym. I've done touch for health. I've done movement-based learning. It's all about just expanding your understanding of the brain, expanding your understanding of the body and what isn't communicating properly. And how can we find a way to teach the brain to regulate that more efficiently? So that's kind of where I am. I don't think my learning journey has finished by any stretch of the imagination. Um, I think if I ever get to a point where I think it's done, then I'm worried because it is a learning journey and every child's nervous system is different. And so I'm often seeing things, okay, not seen that before. Okay, what does that mean? How can I help this child to do things with more ease is always the question that I'm asking myself when I'm working with them. So that's kind of where I am. Always
That's
looking
great.
for solutions, really,
Yeah.
while sticking plaster is a problem.
And then after you start training yourself, how was your home program? What you've done with your son? How did that go?
Well, so with RMT, we tend to do 2 or 3 movements a day. So it's providing regular sensory information but in a gentle way. And you learn how to work with your child rather than the process. Now, when my son was going through the journey, it wasn't taught with those kind of nuances. It was just, these are the movements, go home and do them. I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't know why we were doing them. I didn't know what good looked like. None of that was conveyed at the time. So the way we teach it now and the way we teach parents to do it now is quite different to the way it was 14, 15 years ago. So yeah.
Mhm.
So and it wasn't like hours every day. It was like 15 minutes, and
Yeah,
I mean, within a week, he was walking and running differently
I
to
see.
what he had done before. And I was like, okay, there's something really special about this work. And that's really kind of what galvanized me into seeking to learn to understand it more and to train up in it myself. And
Yeah.
that's been a good 9, 10 year journey. So, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I totally agree with you feeling like the more I'm learning, I feel like the more I need to learn. There's no, y- you know, I guess I've never felt that. I've know everything enough yet.
No.
Well, the thing about the brain too is just there's so much we don't actually know about it. So, which is great, and I love that you incorporate multiple modalities, not just
Yeah.
one way.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons that I wanted to start having guests here from different backgrounds, meaning like you doing multiple modalities and trying to come up with a plan that works for the child, because each child is an individual on their own. So it's not a one kind of treatment fits all. So
Yeah.
I love that approach. How do you, in your experience, bringing to like reflex and kind of through play, the play-based approach piece of it, and more functional setting, how do you incorporate what you have? I know you've been in our group too
Then,
for a while, so you have interest in that.
you know,
How do you incorporate those now with the
so
work you do?
really, it's about finding what interests a child, what captures their imagination. Um, I have tons of toys and things like that lying around in my room. And I find it so interesting to see what things they gravitate towards. And then, we can start a conversation. Well, do you want to play with that? And how do we play with it? And I teach them various strategies. So it's more often than not, it's me kind of just following the child's lead in
Okay.
terms of what they are captivated by, but also constantly assessing how it is that they move, getting a feel for what the muscle tone is doing in their body. What independence of movement do they have or don't they? And how can I adapt things and make things more fun? So if I've got a child who literally will not engage with me in a formal way, like we would with RMT through the physical assessments and doing the movements, then I have to observe them while they play. Pick up, what is the postural stability like? What is the core like? What is, how do they sit? How do they hold their head? What do their shoulders look like? So I'm picking up all of this while they are playing, but also will they cross their midline when
Hmm.
they're playing? Can they cross the midline? And if they're not crossing the midline and swapping in the middle, in the mid, and then going that way, it's all information as to how is the brain actually controlling the body. And so we use a lot of different textured balls, for example, just so that they get a sense of weight and softness and hardness and smoothness and roughness and spikiness. And I've got, so you can bring in sensory engagement and sensory stimulation by just having a variety of similar things, but different sizes and different weights. And I use them for multiple purposes, whether it's for eye tracking or convergence and divergence or swapping and parsing through. And can they actually do that? Or do they have to do that and put it down? And I have, ball pit balls, which I throw on the floor and they get down on the scooter board and they go and pick them all up. So you can develop things like TLR backwards and Landau and all that, the extensor muscle tone down the back of the body, but they're engaging core. And I can get them to lie on their backs and they've got to use the head control to know where they're going. So there's so many different ways. Hula hoops, I've got pool noodles, I've got all sorts of things, and it just all comes out. We just play. So you've got to always, when we're doing the play, you've got to think, there's so many ways you can unpack it. So what you have to think about is what is my intention behind what I'm guiding them to do? What do I want to see them being able to achieve? And how they move? What am I looking for? What am I hoping to help them to be able to develop better? So sometimes you might go in and say, right, okay, I want to work with developing the head control to come through the top of the neck, for example, with the tonic labyrinth and reflex. So what kind of games can you play to encourage that piece? So could they lie down on their tummies with a tennis racket? and do
Mhm.
tummy tennis? Or do they need to lie on their back and then they have to look and do tummy tennis that way? So we're developing both aspects of the TLR and what that then locks on into in the rest of their bodies. And why are we doing it? Why are we doing it? We want to see that they have optimal head control through the top of their necks. So many children don't have that. When you touch them on the back of the neck here, you can actually, sometimes you look and you think, gee whiz, does the brain even know those muscles exist? Because they're so soft
Yeah.
and they're so poor in tone that they really, I'm always saying to everybody, it's about getting a balance, not too high, not too low, but just
Mhm.
the right in between. And so you can do this tummy tennis, you can do blowing bubbles, you can do balloon volleyball, you can do all of these sort of things, just using what it is that you actually have in the home. You don't need fancy equipment
Yeah.
to play with your kids, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, those are great. Those are definitely what we talk about too when it comes
No.
to play based. Is like what are the parents already doing? A lot of equipment, either if it's going to the park and in the classroom, even what they're there, what they're doing, observing the child and having the clinical and observational skill for the therapist to know exactly what they're looking at from a
Mm, mm,
specialist perspective.
mm.
Um, and then for parents, what now that going back to challenges, like what in your experience working with a lot of parents, what did you feel or what did you see being the most challenging um,
Well,
thing for them to work, either reflex work or home?
it really depends on whether the child is on board.
Yes. Yeah, that's good.
Um, what I find actually the challenge more often than not is getting the parents to stick to routine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and trying to fit it into busy schedules. But also the other thing is weighing in balance how much we do with our child every day and knowing when something is too much. Is that holding it, that you get a tranche of people who, you're used to going to the gym, you're used to powering through, you're used to pushing yourself through past past your comfort zone, and you think that the only way to do that is, if you apply that kind of thinking with a child, you're going to get a lot of pushback and a lot of resistance. Um, so one of the things that I have to do is teach the parents to see what I see, to notice what I notice, and to question what we notice and ask the question why that is there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I try and educate them on what sets that all up in the child's nervous system in the first place. And this is why we're working on X, and this is why we're going to focus on Y. And I try and explain to my parents all the way through what it is we're doing and why we're doing it, because I really think that's so important that everybody is on board, and also that the child understands what is going on in their nervous systems, and that they're really up for moving it forward into a stronger place. And when you haven't got everybody's cooperation in something, then it's not going to work.
Yeah.
In my experience, it really does have to be a team effort. But the child needs to be consulted all along the way because it's happening to them,
Yeah.
and I would say that's the hardest thing, is making sure everybody is supporting everybody else, that the whole family unit is
Mm-hmm.
on board, because sometimes you'll get mom who's trying to support the child and dad's not so supportive. So having the parents, the full parent support, whether it's two moms or two dads or whatever, the full parent support at home, creating a safe environment for the child is crucial, because otherwise you just undo all the good you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So I would say that's the hardest bit, is getting them into regularity, getting them into that little bit every day, which is really important for the nervous system to pay attention. I would say those are the hardest things, I think,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
this work. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I'm planning in our RITP. So one of them is part of the assessment is finding out child's interest and
Mm,
making sure that we're using that for a treatment plan, finding their strength, and then you find their interest as well. And
mhm,
making the goal setting includes the parents, of course, if they're educators, the team, what they want to
mm,
work on, and the goal setting also should include the child's interest. So that way
yeah.
you definitely can get results way better
Mm,
because they're the ones who are doing it. And um, the parents, I agree with you when you said with making sure that you're explaining to them, giving them the why behind this exercises. Sometimes the exercise we give up silly or unrelated to the main concern. I'm like, I'm concerned about this, but you make me crawl.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like, so how is
Mm,
that related? So really helping the parents understand. I definitely agree with that.
yeah.
And we are working on more too on home programs. That's how even creating the app, creating the books here in RATP started out as creating a program that parents can easily incorporate at home. Even for me, started out with the same thing as a mom myself. Even though I'm trained, I realized as a parent, oh, I can't really make even stay on the table for me for an hour. It's not going to happen. After a while, I
My son
fatigue.
never worked with me for a single day in his life. But having put myself through the training so that I could help him, he's never, ever let me do a single day with him.
Okay, now let's talk about that. See, that parents need to hear that. So to feel okay and even relief because they feel like the pressure. And when I talk to parents, I'll tell them that I'm trained. I can work with your kid.
Yeah,
But the whole books were created because I needed something quicker with my own. And I had a feeling, I'm like, if I'm struggling this much, there is a relationship between a parent and a mom and a parent and a child is different. And you cannot be your child's therapist because you're just
very
crossing.
possible.
Yeah.
So this is why working with somebody who is qualified, who can say to you, right, I recommend that you do X, Y, and Z, a
Yeah.
child will be more likely to respond because my therapist has said that I've got it hurt.
Yeah.
I never succeeded in getting my son to do a single day with me.
Yeah.
And he loves hearing the stories about how I've helped other kids. But every time I bring up the subject, and he's 28 now, every
Mhm.
time I bring up the subject of you still need to work with your ATNR, he changes the subject and and thinks, and I know it's his ATNR. You
Yeah.
know, I know he didn't crawl properly. He still can't drive. Um, and then he goes, yeah, one day I'll get a car and I'll drive. And then, well, good luck with that one, because every time he turns his head, his leg goes into extension. So he
Ah,
speeds up when
oh.
he should be slowing down.
Oh, that's scary.
So doing driving with him is absolutely terrifying. And every time he moves his head, of course, when you turn your turn to the right, you should be
Yeah.
flexing. He goes into extension. So going around corners is pretty scary.
Oh
And
man.
until we get his ATNR integrated, that is going to continue to be a problem, but he won't
Yeah.
work. And so
Would you
that's
work with the other
helpful with
therapist?
professional.
Um,
Yeah. Mm, yeah.
so yeah, that is definitely and some parents I have to say they struggle, but they are succeeding in our program. They
Mm,
like
mm,
you, they can find therapists, and then they realize I'm gonna get trained myself. And we have some cases that we have to learn, like, okay, you're gonna need to back off a bit and then ease into it. And some of them, it's quite nice to see that the kids are interested and now they're
yes.
taking ownership. but it is not as easy, it seems. So I definitely recommend for parents, even in our, we have this, our Facebook free group that we
Mm,
have and involved there too, to always have a specialist
mm, mm,
work with them. And I think my concern, and I want to see what you think about it too, um, social media, and you can always information easily. This is a free information too for
mm,
parents, which
mm.
is good. Some of the concern can be feeling that just because if they're not fully trained or being trained under a specialist and advice just online,
Yeah.
running with it, that's
Yeah.
concerning to me.
Right.
I find that concerning.
I
um,
find it hugely concerning. So I'm with you
mhm,
100%, Cricket.
yeah.
My concern is that people don't understand that their child's nervous system is unique.
Mhm,
And it's all very well looking for advice and free advice and all the rest of it. But if you haven't been trained on how to pick up that their child's safe with the movements, safe with the sensory stimulation, and also how to know that you've done enough with your child. I am really, really concerned that it's becoming a bit of a free for all.
mhm,
We can't police the internet.
yeah.
I know parents are desperate to help their kids. I completely get that. I was one of those parents, and all the parents who come to see me are in the same boat. But it takes years to train in this. It
Yeah.
takes years to really fine tune your observation skills. To notice when you've done enough, to notice when the body is becoming into a more balanced state. And, you can teach that directly in a face to face course. You cannot teach this through a video. You cannot teach this through a few words on the Facebook group or whatever. And it does worry me that I'm seeing an increasing number of posts where people have overwhelmed their kids' nervous systems and the fallout that goes with that. You know, I wouldn't go on social media to ask for advice on how to self treat myself for chiropractic or physical therapy or even occupational therapy. I wouldn't do it.
Mhm,
And and I'm not presuming to compare our training to their training. I'm not. But it is a specialist field. And I know we're trying to help parents because the more we get the education out there, the more people will understand. But you still need to be guided by somebody who knows what they really are doing, I'm completely with you on that. I'm very concerned, and I know that my colleagues here in the United Kingdom are very concerned. Um, because at the end of the day, we all very, very much care about the safety and the well-being of the child. And it's very easy to get caught up with, oh, so-and-so's told me that my child has this reflex and this reflex and this reflex unintegrated. And then parents can go into blind panic about it
yeah.
and think that they have to throw everything at but the kitchen sink at their child's daily programs.
Yeah.
And, I get it. I get it. I was that parent. But please work in as far as you can with somebody who is trained,
Yeah.
is what I would say. You know, one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
One modality doesn't fit all. One approach doesn't fit all. And this is why working with somebody who has multiple backgrounds, multiple aspects of training, who can draw from
Mhm.
your skill set, can gently guide parents. Right, let's try this. Here's right. Because there isn't, you're going to work on this reflex and that's going to sort thing, and then you do this work. I'm sorry, it doesn't work because everyone's different.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you. I agree with you, and I know where your heart is. I know that the purpose of writing your books was to try and bring a way of helping parents, but they do need to understand how to look out for the physiological signs of having done enough.
Yeah.
Feel their child's body. Is the exercise flowing in their body? Is it smooth? Is it even? Or can you pick up any stress or resistance in the muscles? Because you can. From the moment you touch your child's body, you can pick it up. Do the ears go red? That's a really, really good indicator. When the ears go red, that's a really, really good sign that the child has had enough, even if it's only been 10 seconds. They've had enough. Don't push it. Yeah. So I do think parents, if they are going to try and go it alone, they really need to sign up for doing some in-person training first.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
some action.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's some of my concern even in the group is sometimes I be like cautious about what people are answering, and I do need to address it at least in our own little
Oh,
ecosystem that we have, and making sure that we're not thinking, oh, one of the things is like just because some kind of retained reflex, which you know what majority people do. Yeah,
I
it's it's just like how are we compensating our our life, how functional we are, and it's not as scary as what it sounds like. I think the fear is coming is because it sounds very scary. Like, oh my, it has to be, it's a diagnosis. Like that's how they see it. I'm like, not a diagnosis. It's
Right.
just
So
a
it's development.
springboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like a springboard for us, at least for me. Treatment, the way I use it as I work on functional. I work on developmental milestone, movement patterns, and this is the foundation. And then you're going to build on top of that. It's just like you said, reflex and is not linear. It's dynamic. We should treat a child holistically. It's not one size fits all. It's just one. That's why it's concerning when we're so focused on that and when we forget everything else. For instance, there was a question that was, at question answered. I usually don't have time, and lately I've been busy with all the projects I'm doing, but I had a break, so I was answering questions. There was a question that was by the parent, 13 years old, and still needing to, he's still bedwetting, and then parent. And I realized I'm like, it doesn't sound like this parent has a specialist working with them. That's what I'm trying to pick up. Like, it's a parent working with them, still, bedwetting. But then parent realized, oh, he has a vestibular issue too. Maybe I should work on that. And so the tendency, so my advice was like, yeah, he's 13 years old. You can do a couple of vestibular activities, you can do ATNR, some exercises, but don't stop, the spinal gland or working on. But and you can see in the conversation, I had to go and explain my reasoning afterwards, like why I go through developmental milestone. And he's 13 years old and he's bedwetting, so you have to look at a child holistically. Just
Yes.
the retention, but the chronological development, emotional development, age,
Yeah.
psychological development. We're not just looking at. I think I'm noticing, in my opinion, is like some treatment plans that some people is they see the retention and the hyper focus on one reflex and forget the rest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then,
And the whole
well, I'm
child.
like, guys, yeah, we should not look at it that way. Hopefully, as we develop these books and our program, I make sure that I talk like it's my responsibility now to, since I created these books too, right? That the intention was never to say, ATNR, work on it. Like I have multiple books, right, for different reflex. The intention was actually I have exercise ideas, and let me give you multiple ways to
Yeah.
address
Yeah.
these different reflexes. It was never to say work on one thing. That I mean, now by the time you do everything, the child's going to be 21, right? So you
Yeah.
can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think
Same
that's my
choice. It's a menu of choice, you know.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then a specialist is best to deal with that. Like a specialist can actually look. That's what we are trained to do. That's why you should. I always say go to a specialist who can look at the child holistically
Mm.
and create a treatment plan. Um, and the way you choose your treatment, like what kind of specialist you can work with, can be obviously area you're at now, who's accessible can be one.
And
But then
mhm.
depending on your child's need, and you can work with different specialists like PTs are being trained,
Mm.
specialists like yourself that who are working with kids and working on reflex integration work. Can be parents can be trained themselves as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
If you're doing approach, but you can also combine. Like I'm trained in MNRI, that's my background, but I created the reflex integration through play because as an OT, something that fits everything about what I do. So I want to be able to incorporate reflex integration throughout my session, and
Yeah.
some modalities wasn't fitting as much. So then you create, we have a play-based approach that works.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
but at the end of the day, the goal is the brain-body connection, and to really, just like you said, work on the nervous system and where the child is at.
Yeah.
Um, so I just want to make sure that that information is out. You know, there's a lot, but then now with a lot, parents can be over as well. Which one? So get yourself.
Well, I think the most important piece of advice I could give parents is the first thing we have to achieve is to help the child to feel safe in their bodies.
Yeah.
Because if they don't know how to feel safe in their bodies, they're not going to know how to feel safe in the world. It's just an impossible equation. Do they know the front from their back, their left from their right, their top from their bottom? Do they inhabit their bodies, or are they all in their head and the body just happens to take them around from place to
Mhm.
place? I would say safety is absolutely the first thing. And safety in terms of how regulated are we as parents? And do we communicate good self-regulation ourselves to our children? That is the first thing that has to be addressed, I would say, in every family scenario. And are we able to calm them? Are they able to co-regulate with us? That has to be the first piece. But certainly going to a specialist who is able to assess the whole child. Look at you, as you say, look at the emotional regulation, look at the postural control. Yes, let's get a sense of where the reflexes are on their developmental journey through the assessment and checking. But then it's going to be a bit of a journey trying to figure out how to put the puzzle pieces together, because my experience, I don't know if you find the same, it's not necessarily chronological.
Mhm.
So people say, oh, work with the fear paralysis reflex, then work with the motor reflex, then work with the tail, because that's the chronological order of their development. It's not always the case,
Mhm.
you know. And how do you know when you're done?
Mhm.
How do you know when the reflex is integrated or when it has just simply failed to develop? How do you tell the difference between the two? Because some of the sensory tests don't give you the kind of feedback you would expect from an active reflex. And in my experience, it's down to how well is the brain actually processing the sensory information in the first place. So if it's really shut down and it's not letting the sensory signals in, you're not really going to get the physical reaction that you might expect. So working with a specialist, I would say, is absolutely crucial because, many of us will work remotely if people haven't got access to somebody nearby. I work via Zoom. My observation skills, I can see what's going on in a child's body, and I can guide parents through my words and and I can ask them to be my hands and teach them how to be my hands working with the child. But it's that dance between, is it integrated or is it underdeveloped? Full stop. And testing, my belief is that we should really be testing reflexes flat on the floor because that's where they develop in the first place. So if we overemphasize all of our checks in a standing position, which is where our compensation skills are the best established, we're not always going to get the same a true response. For example, I've tested TLR standing on every an adult who comes into my room, I've tested the TLR standing. And I can promise you, I get very different feedback when I test them lying down. Very different feedback. And that actually gives me a truer reflection of where the reflex is in its developmental journey than I do from a standing test. So with parents, just to really encourage them to find a specialist who can guide them, at least, that they catch up with. If it's not once a month, certainly once every couple of months or something like that would be my advice.
That's great. Yeah, that's good advice. Definitely find, if you're listening to a parent, find yourself a specialist. In the meantime, one thing I would add to that to make it an easy ask for parents would be have your child moving, do things that is movement based. If you cannot find a therapist near you, put them in some kind of sports. It's martial arts. It's one of my favorites. If I go swim is another really, really good one. If they do not like that, any kind of like sports that they are inclined. So this is where you take your child's interest and make sure that they, because all of these integration, all these specialists that we work on, we actually give out the assessment and the intervention is through movement. Is you can actually do that. So if any of you like live in a remote area, so what am I going to do? At least do that, like put them in some kind of sport away from screen
Get outdoors, get them climbing trees,
yes.
rolling down hills, spinning on roundabouts, swinging on swings.
Yes.
Get them out.
Yeah. Like
Moving,
that.
moving,
Yeah.
moving, moving.
Yeah. That just you by doing that without even knowing how the brain works, having a specialist, you have no idea. You're like doing more than half of majority, like at least 60-70%, just by having them experience being exposed to that. Sensory integration and reflex integration work together. Uh, they're not separate things. So you can do that. There are resources that you guys can find online as well to us as well. If you're on our Facebook, Gaynor, like she's active there. That's why I pulled her out. I wanted to have, for those of you who are familiar and are in our group, and you probably seen her answer your questions. So there are actually multiple therapists in the program and in our group as well who work with parents remotely to consult. So if you don't have a therapist working with you and you need like some kind of support, reach out to us. We have also an app that my books so far, all the exercises, we have actually added it in the app to make it easier for parents and working with you, to give you like a playlist that you can really work with. We have that as well. Don't feel so overwhelmed by hearing your child has reflex retention and body. It's really, you should not be as worried. It sounds scary because you're not familiar with it, but
Yeah.
it's really not as scary.
Not a scary disease like cancer, okay? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's incredibly common.
it's very common. You have it probably, the
Yeah.
teachers have it. Like I teach, parents as well as schools and classes too when we do teacher training or adults, anyone, like it's in our body. Depending on what kind of injury you went through or trauma, you might have a retention again, and you can constantly work and move. You move as well, so the more you exercise, that's why our body even feels more integrated and aligned when we're working out. I love Pilates and yoga, like exercise like that. If you're an adult, if you don't have a therapist, at least go to work out, do those kind of exercises. That helps. Um, but definitely work with a specialist. This is what they specialize in. Uh, don't try to do it yourself. If you want to do it yourself, like just what Gaynor did, is go in and get trained because you can. It's not just limited to OTs and PTs and doctors or specialists.
Yeah, it is. And the beauty is that there are loads of different programs out there,
Yeah,
and many of them are completely open to training parents. And hands-on in-person training, I would say, is the best if you
yeah,
can,
yeah,
because it's also good for the parents to experience the effects of movement on their own bodies.
yeah,
But yeah, it's not something to be absolutely terrified about. Um, I would say the reason explore reflex integration is because you can see the negative impact it is having on your child's development and their own lives. You know, I mean, I know hand on heart that I have got reflexes in my system that my brain still hasn't mastered. I'm pretty sure I can tick off which ones have come through in my system and which ones haven't. And it hasn't stopped me from getting upright and walking. It hasn't stopped me from functioning in life. The reason to do reflex integration is when you can see the effort of trying to counter it in day-to-day life
yeah,
is hugely costly on the
mm,
energy front and is making life extremely difficult for them. And, then, they get diagnosed with ADHD or dyslexia or whatever. To pursue primitive reflex integration is to look for the root cause of why these learning difficulties exist. But you will need the guidance of somebody who's been doing it for a while to help you to navigate what decisions you make next. And you cannot tackle everything all at once because that will overwhelm you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you
Uh,
so
Yeah.
for joining us and for being here. I really appreciate it. And if people wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way to reach out to you?
Probably best to email me
Okay.
on gaynor@rulesrmte.co.uk. Probably the easiest way. Or reach out to me through my business page on Facebook, which is Rules Rhythmic Movement. Um, I would say I'm in the middle of trying to move house, so it's kind of a lot going on right now, moving to a completely different area in the UK. So my life is kind of all up in the air at the moment. But I'm still happy to support people online
Yeah.
if that's what they need. And I'm happy to answer questions, but I do charge for my time, however much my time is being used to answer questions, I will be charging for.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there we go.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're
Thank
most
you for
welcome.
coming.
Thank you for inviting me to join you.
Yeah.